See, my question is, I actually very recently I saw a video of a forward which was sent to me, um, where they are talking about cellular memory, uh, where they have very clearly mentioned that when a person dies, whatever is on his mind at the last moment, or whatever he has seen just before he died. Yeah. So the thing is that when a person, as I just said, when a person dies or just closer to his uh, death, whatever thing he has seen last, or whatever situation he has experienced at the last moment, that is imprinted on imprinted in on all his organs. That is what the video is talking about. It's not just memory which is connected to the mind, because when we talk in layman terms, when we talk about memory, we are always talking about the mind. So here it is a kind of it's a situation where the imprint is not just on the mind. That is what the video is talking about, that the imprint is on the other organs other than the mind also. Of course, mind is not an organ, but
Yeah.
it is on the other organs also. So
Yeah.
here they've given an example of an individual uh, who had a heart transplant, and he started getting weird dreams of some flashes in the sky, and something like gunshots, and it would leave him very disturbed. And then his wife got to speak to the donor's wife, and that is when they found out that it seemed that the donor had died, uh, had experienced had died of gunshots. So it is quite probable that that was the last cellular memory which was imprinted on his heart. So when the transplant took place, the donee also had to suffer this kind of fear. And yes, we would have heard of many such people uh, going through this. Now, my question here is that uh, how is it that cellular memory is imprinted on a jada, jada as in the gross body, uh, after we have died and left it behind? Because the gross body we are leaving behind, the
Yes.
organs we are leaving behind. So, so the organ is a dead organ for all practical purposes.
Right.
So how is that memory staying back with it? And is it that the person who dies also carries um, that experience, that pain with him or her into his next birth? That's what I was wondering what it's
Right.
about.
Okay. The the physical body, the actual physical form, is one of the 5 sheaths. All these 5 sheaths we experience collectively as ourself. So Bhagavan says the term body in this context is a collective term for all the 5 sheaths. In the 5th verse of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, he says, Udal Panchakosa Uru. But he also says the body is jada. So when he says the body is jada, that means insentient, he's referring not only to the physical body, but to all the 5 sheaths. That is, the life in the body is not aware. That's a pranamaya kosha. The manomaya kosha. Manomaya kosha means the grosser functions of the mind, and that includes perception, memory, the grosser thoughts, feelings, and so on. They are jada. The intellect is also jada. The intellect is the intellect is our ability to see things clearly, but the intellect itself is jada. The 5th and subtlest of the 5 sheaths, what is called the Anandamaya kosha, is also called chittam, which means the will. That is, it is said to consist of all the vāsanās. They are also jada. So none of the 5 sheaths are sentient. What is sentient is ego. Ego mistakes itself to be this body. to be this collection of 5 sheaths. And therefore, in the view of ego, this person, this consisting of these 5 sheaths, seems to be sentient. But what is actually sentient is not the person, but only the ego. The person is just these 5 sheaths, all of which are jada. So memories are obviously, memory is just an impression left by something we've experienced in the past has left an impression on our mind, and we can recall that impression to a greater or lesser extent. That is what a memory is. So memory is a jada. So that was the first thing to clarify. Then when we, regarding this thing about cellular memory, this is an observation that is, as you say, they have, this is something they have learned from heart transplants. In many cases, people who've had a heart transplant, for example, they may have no, before their heart transplant, they may have no liking for a particular kind of food. But after the heart transplant, they suddenly find they have a craving for a particular type of food, which is not a food that they've ever liked, but they suddenly have a taste for that. That was a food that the person whose heart they have had a liking for that. That's just one example, but there are many things like this. And also sometimes even, as you say, some vague memories or things like that, this is carried over. This is not entirely surprising because generally nowadays neuroscientists are focusing on the brain, because the brain is the center of where the mental activity seems to be going on. But actually, we don't experience I am this brain. What we experience is I am this body. We experience the whole body as ourself. And so actually the mind is functioning not just in the brain, it's functioning throughout the body. So so it seems in some way some qualities of the mind remain in the tissues of the heart but are transplanted, and so the person who receives that heart receives some of those things. This is not, as I say, it's not entirely surprising. The other thing to remember in this context is, though the body seems to us to be physical, according to Bhagavan, even this physical body is actually just mental. In dream, we experience a body as ourself. That body, so long as we're dreaming, that body seems to be physical, and the world in which it's acting and living seems to be physical. But when we wake up from a dream, we recognize it was all entirely mental. It was our own mental creation. So according to Bhagavan, just as the dream world is a mental projection, the waking world is also a mental projection. So this body is, it is essentially, it's a mental phenomenon. It's something we perceive. So it has no existence independent of our perception of it. So because the nature of ego is to rise, and as it rises, it projects and experiences a body as I. This is what Bhagavan means in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, when he says about ego, Urupatri undam, urupatri nikam, urupatri undumukha ongam. That means grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on form, it flourishes. The first form the ego grasps is the body, because only when it takes itself to be a body can it see other forms. As he says in verse 4 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Uruvam Tanayin, Ulhu Paramatran. If oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? So in order to be aware of any other forms, we first need to take ourselves to be a form. So ego first grasps the form of a body. So what does Bhagavan mean by grasping the form of a body? Does the body exist independent of ego? No. As he says in the next verse, verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. That means these forms come into existence only when we rise as ego. So grasping form means we project, and in the case of a body, we grasp it as I. In the case of other forms, we grasp it as things perceived by us. So the ego is grasping form by perceiving things. But whatever form here means any type of phenomenon. It's not just talking about physical forms, the thoughts, the feelings, the perceptions, memories, everything is, they're all forms of one kind or another. So the root of everything is ego. This body is just an expansion of ego. The body means all the 5 sheaths, they're just an expansion of ego. But the ego is distinct from these. This is a form, but body has grasped as I, but ego is not the, ego is the subject. All forms are objects. They're things perceived by it. That's why Bhagavan says ego is a formless phantom. That is, the subject has no form of its own, but it identifies itself with the form of a body, and consequently it sees other forms. So when we understand this relationship, what is sentient is only the ego. The ego is what perceives all this. So when it is conjectured by these scientists on the evidence of heart transplant patients, but actually the memories are embedded in the tissues of the body, how can we understand this in terms of Bhagavan's teachings? The 5 sheaths are sometimes compared to the layers of an onion, particularly in relation to the process of analysis that is called neti-neti. That is, we first discriminate why we cannot be the physical body, we cannot be the life, we cannot be the mind, we cannot be the intellect. This is compared to peeling off the layers of an onion. If you peel all the layers of the onion, you end up with nothing. So if we peel the layers of these 5 sheaths, we end up with ego, but ego cannot stand without these 5 sheaths. So if we separate ourselves from these 5 sheaths, ego merges back in its source, which is pure awareness. So, but though for certain purposes, the 5 sheaths are compared to the layers of an onion, that is a rather gross analogy. The layers of an onion, each layer is distinct from the other. But the 5 sheaths are not exactly like that. That is, the life, the outermost sheath, outermost here is figuratively speaking, metaphorically speaking, outermost sheath is the physical body. But within the physical body is the life, the pranamaya kosha. The pranamaya kosha pervades the whole body. Likewise, the mind pervades the whole body, the intellect pervades the whole body. So it's not like one is in, when it said one is inside another, it is not exactly like the layers of an onion. It is, but each of the more subtle sheath is said to be within the grosser sheaths. So the life is within the physical body, the mind is within the life, the intellect is within the mind, and the will is within. So you go deeper and deeper, but it's not like layers. It is like each pervades the other. So the place where memory is actually stored in terms of the 5 sheaths is the manomaya kosha. But the manomaya kosha pervades the whole body. So the impressions left in the manomaya kosha, in the mind, there may also be corresponding impressions left in the tissues of the body. Because though the mind is not the physical form, there's a correspondence between them. That each of these 5 sheaths, they're intimately connected. Each sheath is intimately connected with each other one. So the mind is intimately connected with this body. So the impressions that are left in the mind, the memories that are left in the mind, are also left in, also make some form of impression in the tissues of the body, which is why there is this phenomenon that if someone's heart is transplanted, or it seems this is particularly the case in heart transplant patients, but who knows, it may also be the case in the case of people who have kidney or liver transplants, maybe less so, but it may also be so. We don't know. So some of the impressions of the mind of a person whose heart that was are somehow carried over. That's all this tells us. But this is not something that is of great significance to us in terms of Bhagavan's teachings. I mean, what we need to understand for Bhagavan's teachings is the relationship between ego and these 5 sheaths. Ego is the subject, the 5 sheaths are all objects. They're all things perceived by us. That is, our desires, for example, that's the will. They have
the
no...
5 sheaths will also be phenomena.
Sorry?
I mean, they will be taken as... The 5 sheaths are also considered phenomena?
Yes, they're all objects perceived by us. For instance, you have a desire to eat a certain type of food. That desire is something that you are aware of. You are not that desire. It is an object perceived by you. It's a very subtle object, but it's still something that is within your experience.
But that ego is aware of that desire, right?
Ego, yes. All these are only for ego, because what we actually are is pure awareness. In the view of pure awareness is awareness that is not aware of anything other than itself. So in the view of pure awareness, there is nothing other than pure awareness. It's only when we rise as ego that this distinction between subject and the multiple objects comes into existence. So multiplicity, diversity, difference arises only with ego. That's why Bhagavan says, when ego rises, everything rises. When ego is not, everything is not. So, but the memories that we have, just take ordinary memories. We can remember what we did yesterday. We can remember the school we went to. We can remember as a child playing, friends we played with and things. These are all things other than ourselves. They are things that in the past we experienced, and an impression was left by those experiences, so we can recall the experiences to our mind now. So the memories, like the desires and like all the other components of the 5 sheaths, they're all jada. The only thing that is sentient is ego. That ego is the perceiver. All phenomena are things perceived by it. So I'll just go through some of the questions you asked. You said, so my question here is, this cellular memory is imprinted on a jada body organ, which is left behind after we are dead. Or is this memory imprinted on the jiva, which kind of goes with us to the next birth, being reborn as ego? That is, generally, when the body dies, we forget everything about that life. In some cases, people may have memories of their past life. There are cases, and it is said that under deep hypnosis, people can sometimes recall things from past lives. Like people may, in a state of deep hypnosis, they may start speaking a language that they've never even heard of, but it's a language that they spoke in a previous life. So at some very deep...
skill which they have built up, it could be a skill, it could be, or a skill which they've built up, or a fear which they have, like fear of water or fear of heights.
Well, the thing is,
sometimes a child is born with that, so that would be a continuation.
But that may not necessarily be. That is, supposing in one lifetime we drown.
Sorry? Yeah.
Suppose we drown. In the next lifetime, we may have a fear of water. We may have a fear of putting our head underwater. So that is, we may not remember drowning, but something has been carried over. So things are carried over to a certain extent, but generally speaking, to a large extent, our memories of previous lives are obliterated. And Bhagavan has said that is grace. Because if we remembered all the things that we did in our previous lives, even remembering all the things we've done in this lifetime is a burden for us. If we could remember things from past lifetimes and all the terrible things we must have done, because in the past, we are undergoing a process of purification. That is, the whole spiritual path is a path of purification. But so we may have attained a certain state of purity now. There are certain actions now, but we would not do because we would consider it wrong. But many lives before, we may have done those actions and thought nothing of it. We may have done terrible atrocities in the past. So we are very blessed to have forgotten the past. So,
wouldn't your vāsanās which are there, which we have today,
yes,
it could be a vāsana of being, just liking cleanliness a lot. It could be an OCD which you possess. Now it could be something which you are carrying forward from a previous birth, or So, I mean, what I'm trying to understand is that is also, I don't mean it's literally a memory, but it is a kind of an imprint on your current jiva. Right?
This was just the point I was going to come to. That is, people often confuse memories and vāsanās. They're two distinct things. That is, the chittam is said to be the store of vāsanās, but in many even quite learned people who translate Advaitic texts, Vedantic texts into English, translate chittam as memory, because just like memories are impressions from the past, the vāsanās come from the past. But whereas memories are perceptual, are impressions left by things we have perceived. So in other words, they're perceptual impressions. Vāsanās are inclinations. There's a significant difference. That is, the memories are one of the grosser functions of the mind. So they belong to the Manamaya kosha. The vāsanās belong to the Anandamaya kosha because they're very much more subtle. Both come from the past, but they're two different types of, one is impressions from the past, in other words, memories. The other is inclinations from the past. Vāsanās means our inclination. So in the case of say having a particular obsession, like an obsession for cleanliness, that is a vāsana. That's an inclination. We're inclined to always want to keep everything clean. In the case of, for example, but we mentioned before, if you drown in a particular life, in the next lifetime you may have a particular fear of water, or if you die in a fire, you may have a particular fear of fire. We need to you may not remember what happened. You may not have any memory, but you were burnt in a fire or you drowned in water. So that memory has been wiped out, but it has created a fear in you, a fear of water or a fear of, that fear in its seed form is a vāsana. The seed, that is, vāsanas are the seeds of all our likes, dislikes, desires, hopes, fears, all these, but these are manifest forms of vāsanas. Sometimes people have difficulty grasping the distinction between vāsanas and desires. Vāsanas is the desire in a seed form. I can give an example. Supposing you have a vāsana, an inclination to enjoy tasty food. In one lifetime, you may be born in a certain culture. And you have an inclination not only to like tasty food, but to like familiar food. So in a certain lifetime, you're born in a certain culture and you're familiar with a certain type of food. So you desire that type of food. In another life, you may be born in another culture where you're familiar with another type of food. But vasana, in both cases, makes you have a liking for familiar food. But the actual object of your desire, in one lifetime, you desired a particular type of food that belonged to your then culture, whereas in another lifetime, you desire another type of food. So the object of the desire is different, but the underlying inclination is the same. You like familiar food. That is, that inclination to like familiar food, that is the vasana. But desire is, in this lifetime, you like rice and samba. In your previous lifetime, you might have liked spaghetti because you happen to be Italian. So, I mean, so this is just an example, but it's to show there is a subtle difference between the form the desire takes and the vasana that underlies it. So in different lifetimes, the form of a desire may be different, but the underlying inclination that makes us desire that type of thing is the same. So vasanas are the subtlest form, the seed form of our desires, of our likes, our dislikes, and so on. So what is carried over from that is collectively, all our vasanas are called the chittam. They're also called the anandamaya kosha, which is called the karana sarira, the causal body, because our desires are, that is, these vasanas are the cause of everything. Bhagavan said, even this material world is nothing but a projection of our vasanas. So vasanas are the seeds not only of our desires, but also of that desires are subtle. Gross one desires are thoughts. So the desires manifest as thoughts, and so grosser and grosser. So whatever, all phenomena, they are all a manifestation of our vasanas. So vasanas are the seeds. It is the vasanas are distinct from ego. Ego is not its vasanas, but it is the very nature of ego to have vasanas. During the course of our progress in the spiritual path, our mind is being, our will is being purified. That is citta-śuddhi. That's purification of the will. That means our vasanas, our vishaya vasanas, the vasanas that incline us towards vishayas, are getting weakened. The more they are weakened, the purer our mind becomes. And when the vishaya vasanas are strong, we tend to have more, we tend to be more greedy, more selfish and everything. As our vasanas reduce in strength, we become more kinder, compassionate, empathetic, more generous. So the purification of the mind, that is the weakening of the vishaya vasanas, manifests as a better and better character, better and better person. Instead of our mind being dominated by asubha vasanas, they're dominated by subha vasanas. So this is all part of the process. So over the course of lifetime, our vasanas are changing and they are getting reduced in strength, but ego remains the same. However, to the extent that the vasanas are reduced in strength, to that extent does ego become submissive and is ready to subside. So the purification of the chittam, of the will, is essential for spiritual progress. And eventually, we need to surrender ourselves completely. In order to surrender ourselves completely, we need to turn our attention within to face ourselves alone. In order to face ourselves alone, we need to let go of everything else. So long as the vishaya vasanas are strong, that is, so long as we have a strong inclination to grasp things other than ourselves, we won't be able to turn within and sufficiently to let go of everything else. So this is why the purification of the mind that is what is happening as we are progressing on the spiritual path. Whether the other spiritual paths like the bhakti marga, that is gross aspects of the bhakti marga, the puja, japa, and dhyana, or even the practices of yoga. These may purify the mind to a certain extent, but to purify the mind radically, that is to go beyond a certain point in the purification of the mind, it is only by means of self-investigation and self-surrender. Because in self-investigation, we are turning our mind directly within. We are turning our back, that is, we are directly opposing the Vishaya vasanas. Whereas in other practices, supposing, for example, you're doing japa, if you have love for you're doing japa, say, of the name of your favorite god. So you're doing japa because of your love for that name of God, you are focusing your attention on the name. And thereby you are withdrawing your attention from all the other things. Vishaya vasanas may be drawing your mind out to other things, but you keep on drawing it back to that vasana. So you are weakening your Vishaya vasanas, but you're strengthening that vasana to cling to that name or that name and form, which is also something other than yourself. Whereas in self-investigation, so we are weakening some Vishaya vasanas and strengthening another vasana. Whereas in self-investigation, we are turning our attention away from all phenomena back towards ourselves. So we are weakening all Vishaya vasanas. So this is the direct path, and it's the only path that can lead to the complete eradication of all vasanas. Of course, so long as ego remains, there will be vasanas to a greater or lesser extent. Only when ego is eradicated are all vasanas eradicated. But in order to eradicate ego, we need to greatly weaken the Vishaya vasanas. To use an analogy, if you've got a very dense bush, you want to root out that bush. But in order to root it out, you first have to cut a lot of the leaves and branches in order to get at the root. It is the same with this. We need to weaken our Vishaya vasanas in order to root out ego. Because so long as we have strong Vishaya vasanas, ego will not be willing to turn within. Or it will turn within to some extent, but it will not be willing to turn the full 180 degrees.
So, Michael, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
While you're talking about the other forms of like meditation or like nama japa, bhakti, singing bhajans, doing satsang, all these things, they are all outer, it is going bahirmukhi in Bhagavan's own words.
Yes.
But what and here my question is that this is my personal experience, that I started off with self-enquiry. I started off with reading Who Am I and all the possible literature of Bhagavan, listening to your videos.
Yes.
But somehow the shift which has happened is suddenly it has moved to appreciating or towards Arunachala.
Yes.
So it's I think I've asked you this question earlier also in the meeting, and it's still not the penny has not dropped yet.
Right.
Where I'm trying to understand that so it is more like it's Arunachala Shiva, and you enjoy that. You enjoy that completely. In fact, it's a situation that where sometimes you get involved in day-to-day activities. You get involved. Sometimes you even get angry with somebody. You get jealous of somebody. You get anything, any of the emotions you experience, and then you know that it's not. It should not be happening to you. You don't want it to happen to you. And earlier it was the who am I, you just go back to the who am I self-inquiry mode. Somehow it never felt that effective. But the minute you just say Arunachala Shiva, it's like the word itself, it just it's like it's like, you're here and this is Arunachala Shiva,
Yes.
and you suddenly just come on this side, and
Yes.
it's like you're just pulled to the
Yes.
other side, and you know that you don't even feel that, no, you should not be thinking this, you should not be thinking that.
Yeah.
It just drops, it just
Yeah.
falls.
Yeah.
So, uh, so what is this? So is
Okay.
this again,
Okay. Well, Bhagavan has.
is this again dvaita, which is again
It is
dvaita.
dvaita, but so long as we are experiencing ourselves as a body, where is dvaita?
And you're comfortable with it. You're just happy.
Yes. That is.
So is it you're moving one step down? I'm just trying to ask.
Not exactly. We're not moving one step down. That is the.
It is Bhagavan's path. It is Bhagavan's path.
It is Bhagavan's path, because
he's asked you to do both things. So
that is the key to bhakti. Is not the actions. That is, people think puja, japa, dhyana, these will purify your mind. It's not the actions that will purify your mind, because you could be doing those same actions in order to fulfill your desires. That's not, in other words, it could be, you can do kamya puja, kamya japa, kamya dhyana. It will purify your mind only to the extent to which it is done with love for God. So what is purifying the mind is not the action itself, but the love. So Bhagavan has, regarding Arunachala, we know how much love Bhagavan had for Arunachala, so naturally we feel love for Arunachala. And Bhagavan has revealed that Arunachala has a unique power to turn our mind back within. That every time we think of Arunachala, it is pushing us a little bit more within. So though Arunachala as a hill is an outward form, the real form of Arunachala is that which is shiny in us as eye. So that outward form is constantly turning us back to be turning our mind within. It's the same with Bhagavan. Look at a picture of Bhagavan. Look at Bhagavan's eyes. Where are Bhagavan's eyes pointing you? They point you back towards yourself. So though these are outward forms, they can help us to turn our mind within. That is, the mere thought of Arunachala will help us to turn our mind back towards ourselves. So that is the dvaita bhakti and the Advaita bhakti are so closely interwoven. Just read the contents, or read the meaning of what Bhagavan has sung in the 5 hymns, any of the 5 hymns. You can see the non-dual, that is the Advaita and the dvaita are blended in there so beautifully. When we allow our attention to go outwards, there is duality. In that state of duality, the form of Bhagavan and Arunachala are very great aids helping us to turn our attention back within. So there's no absolute contradiction between what he, in verse 8 of Upadēśa Undiyār, he refers to Anya Bhava and Ananya Bhava. Anya Bhava means taking God to be other than ourselves, in other words, taking God to be a name or form. Ananya Bhava is taking God to be ourselves. Of these two, Ananya Bhava is best, but the Anya Bhava helps to push us back to the Ananya Bhava.
Right.
So both have their place.